Hello, this is Hey, What's Going On Around Here? This is about our 40th episode, 40th week. And with me, as always, is Heather Spalding,
Hello.
the editor of the Journal of the San Juans. And it is very comforting, even though I always have my back to you. It's comforting to know that you're there. You got my back.
Oh,
Literally,
yes,
you have my back.
I do.
Our guest today is the one and only John J. Nance. And is there another John Nance running around that you have to use the J?
A whole plethora of them, actually.
Isn't there a basketball player?
I think there is, yeah. At any rate, I put the J in there because there was another author many years ago with just John Nance, and that was to differentiate. But it's only been partially successful.
You don't play basketball?
Not usually, no. Matter of fact, I'm about 5'7". I used to be 5'8". The Air Force thinks I'm 5'9", and I'd have to fly over to put a basketball in a hoop.
You're from Texas. Is there any relation, or John Nance Garner? Is there a story there?
Yeah, there is a story there. I had been asked that for years and years and years and never knew what to say. My dad wasn't sure either. There was a book published by a fellow out in Shreveport, Louisiana, another Nance, who called it the Nance Register and went way back to England. It was just a marvelous work. In fact, I'm trying to find my copy. But he finally confirmed that John Nance Garner is a third cousin 2 times removed. Well, actually, permanently removed now. He's dead. But it's it's one of these things that you keep getting asked because of the name.
This is an honor for me. I'm proud to call this man my friend. This is someone I admire greatly for his accomplishments and for his sense of duty and ability to live up to massive responsibility. We'll talk about that in this hour. And a great sense of humor, a desire to laugh. You know, you have so much responsibility, and we see you on TV, unfortunately, terrible circumstances, and it's really nice to learn that you like to laugh.
Well, I do, but there's in aviation, when something goes wrong is usually when I get on the air and have to analyze things, and there's not much in the way of humor that you can bring into it.
I wouldn't think so.
I've always kind of had a thing going on with how far can you go in the cockpit with humor, and it's not very far. I mean, there are a few things you can say, like folks, those of you on the right side of the aircraft have a beautiful view of downtown Seattle. Those of you on the left side of the aircraft have a great view of the folks on the right side of the aircraft looking at downtown Seattle. That's about as far as you can go. And there are a lot of people that
Southwest Airlines really cornered the market on captain humor, I think.
Well, they need, and the flight attendants took it and ran with it, and did brilliantly at first. And I say at first because they really needed to have a professional comedy writer update their stuff. If I hear one more time that people who try to smoke on the airplane will be reseated on the wing section where the movie today is Gone with the Wind.
Okay. Well, anyway, I can't hide my admiration for John Nance, so I'm not going to try. Well, there you go. Also, I have to do a little full disclosure here. John is also my boss of sorts now. You're chair of our chairman of the board of directors of CNL2 Media, which is now a 1-month-old nonprofit. So I'll behave myself here. We're going to do this in three blocks. In the first section, I want to really start with aviation. That's kind of how you are probably best known.
I think so, yeah. I think so.
So when were you first bit by the aviation bug?
It probably goes back to the womb. Hearing airplanes fly by as a kid, no aircraft ever got past me unnoticed. Yeah, my dad was a pilot in World War II, and he decided not to go into commercial aviation, but he stayed in the reserves. I had an uncle who was shot down 6 times over the English Channel, and the Germans finally got him on the last one for a 2-year stay in the Stalag. And I had another uncle by marriage. I mean, we were an Air Force family, but more than anything else, I loved airplanes and still do.
So let's jump forward to Vietnam. You wound up in Vietnam.
Yep. There was no question that I was going to go into the Air Force, and I went through ROTC, which was a very smart move, I think. And so I got my commission in 1968, and by 1970, But thanks to a little glitch, which was working in my favor, I was in law school at the time, but I got into a program called 3-3. So my senior year of undergraduate was actually my first year of law school. Terribly dangerous, because if you flunk out of that first year, then you've got to do 2 more years to get back to where you should have been. Worked beautifully for me, but it also meant that I had a choice to go either into the JAG, Judge Advocate General, and become a lawyer in the Air Force, or go fly. And I wanted to fly, and I was very happy I did. So by 1971, I'd finished pilot training, and it was a matter of, which airplane do you want to take into combat?
How old were you at this point?
I would have been 24, I think. My first assignment was, and my basic assignment really, was as a C-141 pilot. We don't use them anymore. Big 4-engine jet, very successful, built by Lockheed. Terribly interesting to have an airplane like that in the Boeing area of Seattle. We used to say, look to Lockheed for leadership and Boeing for airplanes. It's a little bit of a conflict. At any rate, I flew that airplane for 23 years in the regulars and the reserves. And Vietnam became just a part of the routine as soon as I got in the saddle in late 1971, all the way through the end of the war in 74.
And then when did you go to Braniff as a commercial pilot?
I went to Braniff on December 5th of 1975, and that was after I'd gotten off of active duty and waited for all those months. Braniff was the carrier I wanted to fly for. And
Why?
It was my hometown carrier in Dallas, and it was, by that time, it had already pioneered so much. At the end of the Plain Plane campaign, some people will still remember that, because this goes way back. Doesn't sound like ancient history to me until you look at the calendar. But what our airline had done was create the ability to move very rapidly, but it did that at a deficit of management prowess because they had almost no middle management. But they could do things like paint all the airplanes Easter egg colors. Matter of fact, it was always fun. You'd come into a place like, I remember Oklahoma City one day taxiing in. I'm second officer on a Boeing 727 that is green. And the tower says, "What color are you today, Braniff?" "We're green." It isn't easy being green.
So you worked your way up, and then you moved to Alaska Airlines at some point.
Yep.
Somewhere in there you were flying a 747, is that right?
Yep, that was for Braniff. We had, towards the end, as we started down the slide into what became bankruptcy in 1982, we had about 5, I think, or maybe 6 747s, some of them brand new off the line. So I got a little bit of time as a flight engineer and 1 total landing as a first officer in the 747. But that was memorable. That airplane is fantastic. It really was one of the high points of my career.
Just that one flight, that one landing?
Just that one landing. Well, I think that was the day after we had taken a brand new 747 on its very first flight, and we had seats for 370 people, and we had 2 passengers. The company was trying to expand ridiculously. They were throwing money away in the tens of millions. And the other reason I remember that flight so well is because even though I was first officer reserve who'd been called in on it, Dave Brubeck, who I almost worship, as a musician, was on board. We had him seated upstairs, and I also brought the one poor coach passenger who was way in the back, and we gave him a first-class seat. But I got to talk for hours with Dave Brubeck, which was fascinating.
Wow. When did you last fly for Alaska?
I think my final flight was in probably 1997, I believe. I was flying as captain, but things were getting very, very intense in terms of my writing, my public appearances, and so on. And they gave me the opportunity to take a little personal leave if I liked, and I took advantage of that. But really, the airline was such a great experience. Alaska, and I know this is parochial because, and I warn my viewers at ABC at times when I've had to comment about the carrier, I'm biased because I'm a captain, former captain, but really it was a fantastic is a fantastic airline. I remember coming. I don't think that's me.
That's me. Sorry. They'll fix that.
I remember getting to the point when I was just about to go ahead and accept a position 2 years after Braniff had collapsed. Braniff, by the way, collapsed on May 12th of 1982 at 4:34 in the afternoon. Not that I remember it well. And 2 years later, I figured, well, okay, if they really want me to come fly, because a lot of my buddies in the C-141 Reserve Unit at McChord Air Force Base had said, come on up and apply. And I remember saying to my wife at the time, what if I get aboard and find out that these people are cowboys? They're not interested in safety, that they're doing something to, I'm already in the public eye here talking about safety. I already had 2 books out. That was a little bit nerve-wracking until I got into the inner workings and realized this was a really leading airline doing a lot of things for safety that people hadn't thought about yet.
So you were writing about airline safety while you were still flying?
The first, yeah, not in the cockpit. I always get asked that question. Do you ride in the cockpit? No, but
Okay.
no, it's kind of hard to do and take care of air traffic control. No, it was a situation where my first book was about the collapse of my airline, Braniff International, called Splash of Colors, and that was sufficiently successful to kind of thrust me into a very high level in national publishing, if you will. And so the second one, I had a wonderful opportunity to be under the aegis and the counsel and mentorship of a fellow who'd been editor for one of the major houses for almost 50 years. Matter of fact, he said, I've been a bookie for a half a century. That was Howard Cady. And Howard was one of these guys who, as he said, about every 2 or 3 years, he had to go stand on his boss's desk and say, you'll either publish what I ask you to publish, or I'm taking my authors and going somewhere else. Those people don't exist today, but back then in the 80s they did. And so he said, why don't we do a book on air safety, because you've been telling me about some of the things you've uncovered here. So the next book was called Blind Trust, and it was about airline deregulation and the disastrous effect it was having on safety. And of course the official line, including the line from the Reagan administration, and I love President Reagan, but they were dead wrong. They kept saying it's not having any effect on safety at all. Yes, it did.
How did your colleague pilots feel about your writing?
Well, that gets into human nature 101. You know, most of the people that I knew and that I flew with and so on were quite happy. They knew that I was extremely careful, never, for instance, with Alaska, to say I'm representing Alaska on this. By the same token, some of them just couldn't stand the idea that one of their pilots was actually commenting on the air. And one guy who, and I won't name him, but he was really virulent and angry. And so I said, okay, give me your home number. He said, why, you want to call me later? I said, well, just give it to me. So he made the mistake of giving me his home number. And I said, okay, now the next time something happens in aviation and they want me to comment on it, I'm going to pass it on to you. No, you can't do that. I said, well, why? You said I'm completely wrong. I shouldn't be doing this. Somebody needs to do this, because aviation is not a priesthood, but it is very much like trying to interview a doctor and have the doctor bring you up to speed on the extreme technical aspects of things that people have not had direct exposure to. Anyway, he never did a piece for ABC. But
So I assume that these first 2 books led to your first appearance as an analyst commentator was it a specific accident?
Well, no, not
How
really.
did that all get started?
It's basically, this goes back to the fact that I had been a broadcaster. I'd worked my way through school doing broadcast news.
So for those of you counting now, that is career number 3. There's pilot in there, there's lawyer, and now there is, an author, I guess. And so now we're up to
That's
4.
what I was just going to say.
Well, it's just
four careers
It's
and
just-
counting.
Writing count.
I never could decide what I wanted to do when I grow up. That was basically it. I had loved broadcasting and had hung around top 40 stations and had gotten an unofficial position helping one particular high-level DJ in the early 60s come up with, matter of fact, he had no imagination. He was a great voice and did a great job on the air, and they paid him a lot of money, bought him a new car and everything. But he was clueless when it came to trying to pick new personalities to put voices with, which is, one of the mainstays back then. You would have a person that basically, if he couldn't come up with anything else, could at least come up with 4 or 5 different non-existent humans with different voices. And so I found I had a bit of a talent for that. did a little FM, got into news, and became the radio newsman, one of the radio newsmen for WFAA in Dallas. WFAA. Which is also confusing because people say FAA, you were working for the FAA? No, WFAA.
Do you have 5 voices?
I got a bunch of them. I haven't exercised them in a very long time. But yeah, everything from back then, of course, before the horror of the assassination of John Kennedy, everybody was doing a Kennedy imitation. That was pretty simple. And then there's some I've had fun with over the years, like, well, Jimmy Stewart, for instance. But I haven't practiced that in a long time.
That's good.
Anyway, that was one of the fun parts of broadcasting back then. You know, you made your own menagerie. And the extent to which you could do that smoothly basically had a direct application to whether or not you got rehired or at least continued, because these top 40 stations were constantly bouncing people in and out. Most everybody will remember WKRP in Cincinnati, the show. And I've said this many times, I knew everybody on there. I didn't know a single person in terms of the actors, but every one of them was stereotypical of somebody that I'd known in broadcasting.
Yeah, that was a great show. So to circle back, you already at this point in your life had broadcast experience.
Yeah.
And now you're writing about, you're basically a veteran pilot, commercial pilot.
Right.
And you are writing books about the industry. So who was the first producer that put all this together and said, I'm going to put this guy on the air? On this subject?
Yeah, I think it was CBS and whoever was producing Leslie Stahl at the time. I got a call out of the blue, and I was just leaving the Air Force, waiting for Braniff, and they wanted me to come comment on something that I'd written a small article about. So CBS was probably the first.
That early?
I think it was, yeah.
Before Alaska?
Uh-huh. Oh, yeah, long before Alaska.
Okay.
It was probably, I'm stretching back here to remember, but I think probably 85 or 86, something like that. It becomes a little bit murky because there was a lot going on back then in my life, and making the shift from active duty Air Force to the private sector, and then to doing all this broadcasting on the side. And I had fun to a certain extent, and it was also kind of a heady experience in the late 80s dealing with more and more outlets, because the situation was they didn't have necessarily anybody to thrust a microphone at who could put it all together quite as, I guess, well as I could do it, because I was trained. It wasn't a natural talent. I was a trained broadcaster. So you put a microphone in my face, I know how to react.
So you kind of started that whole media genre.
To the extent of being an analyst, yes. And I fought this battle even with my own network at ABC in a benign way, but for years and years and years, they said, well, we want you on the air as an expert. No, I don't want to come on as an expert. The joke is, you know, I can't be an expert. I've never been a PERT. We used to have the joke, too, of an expert is a guy caught with a slide tray more than 50 miles from home. You know? And I didn't want any of that. I said, what I do is analyze what I'm given. And that also takes me and the network off the hook, because I'm not advocating a particular position. I'm trying to make sense of what we have to work with.
So that first one, that first time when you were called in to play that role was television, I guess.
Yeah.
Was that an accident?
I'm sure it was, but more than anything else, it was what I had written about in Blind Trust, which was my second book. I had taken a number of major accidents, including the granddaddy of them all, which was Tenerife, March 27, 1977. Two 747s came together on the island of Tenerife, and 600, I think it was, and 87 people died as a result. And the key to that, by the way, was that people wanted to say, well, the captain was an overbearing individual, I could use some words, who basically told everybody what to do and would not listen to anybody. Nothing could have been further from the truth. He was a beloved individual. He was the chief pilot. He was the director of safety. He was an excellent captain. He was under a lot of pressure that day, and he made some human mistakes. And that was really the essence of what I was talking about. Well, then immediately that leads into the fact that we were dropping airplanes quite regularly in the late 80s because we hadn't learned one of the key lessons that was in progress, which is anytime you have a system that is manned by or depends on human perfection, and you have not buttressed that system with ways to absorb the failures that humans are going to make, you are just absolutely begging for more disasters. And that's where we were. We had never understood this. We'd given fleets of wonderful airplanes, marvelous technology, and basically shoved our guys into it and said, now you boys be careful out there here. That was our safety system. You know, build the airplanes as great as they were, but just tell people not to make any mistakes. Well, you can't do that. And so the book basically put me in the public eye as the one who's saying, no, deregulation is having a harmful effect. And because that was a political statement going up against the norm, including secretaries of transportation and so on, suddenly I'm testifying before Congress. Suddenly I'm, you know, the go-to guy. And the thing that really, really bothered me even to this day, I knew what I was talking about, but there was no way for them to know. I mean, they could check my background, but the background was still fairly minimal. And the idea was that if I'd written a book and the book was mainstream, then I must know what I was talking about. I might not have known what I was talking about, and I still would have been on the same number of shows.
But you did.
In this case,
Thankfully, you did.
well,
But you're talking about the way the system could be manipulated.
exactly, and has been, and we see it constantly.
And then you noticed this reality about the aviation world, and you started to notice that it applied to a whole other world.
I did, and the guy who noticed before me was a doctor from Minneapolis, an OBGYN named Dr. Eric Knox. He had been the medical director of a major insurer of hospitals. And he called me up late one evening, I think probably at 9 o'clock, and he was on the East Coast, so this was really late for him. And he said, I've just been reading, he introduced himself, he said, I've just been reading your book, Blind Trust, and he says, you got to come talk to my people. I said, Doc, who are your people? And he told me, I said, well, look, I don't know anything about medicine other than as a consumer. He said, no, you don't understand. Everything that you talked about in Blind Trust, everything that you've had to go through in aviation to understand that this is human failure we're talking about and you have to approach it systemically, is what we've got to go through in medicine. You're 30 years ahead of us. Last time I talked to him about this, he said maybe it was 40 years because we're still way, way behind. But what he was talking about was the idea that in medicine, it had been a cottage industry. And a cottage industry means that it's all dependent on the people involved. Doctors were not hired to be arrogant, but they developed a certain level of arrogance, or what appeared to be that, because they were the only ones who had the methodologies and the only ones who were allowed, so to speak, to take care of their patients. And so to question a doctor, to question a senior surgeon was really a bold thing to do. There was no need for things like checklists. Why would you use it? That's an aviation thing, you know, that's embarrassing for a doctor. All these things that we were learning about human institutions, we were learning in aviation, were initially rejected with eye rolling and everything else, not just by the doctors in medicine. And to a certain extent, we're still fighting that battle today.
Yeah.
Well, I want to circle back. We're going to take a break here in a second, but for John J. Nance fans, and I think there are many, and now there's probably even more, I would commend a program called Mayday, which you can find on YouTube, many, if not all of the episodes, I think maybe all the episodes. You appeared, you were really the main talking head expert in about 20 episodes, 22.
I think that's about right, yeah.
And so this is really interesting if you watch these Mayday episodes, because if there's a common thread in these, it's the causes of these. So they analyze one incident per show, per episode. And if there's, and I watched a number of them, And if there's a common thread, it is that it's never what it looked like.
That's right.
Never.
Never one cause. That's absolutely axiomatic. Secondly, whatever you think at the very first is probably wrong, or at least it's just a tiny portion of the elephant. It's not
Yeah.
the whole thing. And the last one is that in most cases it's human failure, not professional discretionary failure, i.e. it's a nice day, I want to fly a 747 under the Golden Gate Bridge and I clip the tail. That's a professional discretionary thing. That's pilot error. The rest of it is human error, and that's what we're trying to learn or understand.
So I would recommend that you watch, it's easy to Google, it's the Mayday Show, it's produced out of Canada.
Out of
I think it's
Toronto.
still in production, actually, I think it's one of the longest running.
Yep,
Is it
over 130 episodes,
yeah,
still going.
20 plus
Yeah.
years.
And these guys are really meticulous too. They're
Yeah.
very, very careful.
But it's full of surprises, and it kind of teaches you how John Nance thinks too. And you do a beautiful job of explaining.
Well, thank you.
So it's a great series. We're going to come back, we're going to take a little break, and we will be right back to talk about some of John's other careers. We'll be right back.